presentation on patent management, uncovering cost savings in your portfolio. I am Nabu Xavier, marketing executive at PatentSight. And before we get started with the webinar, let me just cover a couple of housekeeping points for you here. Please feel free to ask your questions during the webinar using the questions tab on the webinar control panel. Also on the control panel, you can download today's presentation slides by clicking on the handouts tab. You will also receive an email from us tomorrow with a link to access a recording of today's webinar and the presentation slides. And lastly, at the end of the webinar, you will be redirected to a feedback questionnaire. We would greatly appreciate it if you could spend 2 minutes to submit the survey. Now that that's out of the way, I'd like to go ahead and introduce to you today's presenters. With us today, we have Professor James Gerard Conley. Professor Conley serves on the faculty of both the Kellogg School of Management and the McCormick School of Engineering at Northwestern University. He's a faculty contributor in the Kellogg Center for Research in Technology and Innovation and serves as a faculty fellow at the Segal Design Institute. Currently, he is also serving as a visiting professor in the chair of Technology and Innovation Management at the WHEU School of Management in Germany. Apart from this, he has also served as an appointed member on the U.S. Department of Commerce Trademark Public Advisory Committee to the Patent and Trademark Office and is a charter fellow of the National Academy of Inventors. In 2017, he became a member of the editorial board of California Management Review. Joining Professor Conley is Jean Quinn. Jean is the president and the founder of IPWatchdog.com, a patent attorney, law professor, and leading commentator on patent law and innovation policy. He was recently named one of the world's leading IP strategists by IAM. And last but certainly not least, we have William Mansfield. William is the head of consulting and customer success at PatentSight. He is responsible for overseeing the negotiation, creation, and delivery of PatentSight's global consulting projects, along with managing the customer success team. He works closely with numerous international and Fortune 500 companies to ensure effective deployment of patent analyses for business strategy, M&A due diligence, portfolio management, and other cases. With an economics background and experience in market and R&D strategy in the semiconductor industry, Will approaches patent analytics with an eye on business value creation. Once again, thank you everyone for attending our webinar presentation. And with that, I hand it over to you, Gene.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for spending a portion of your day here today with us to talk about this issue, this very important issue, cost savings. I mean, it's always an important issue, but right now it's particularly important as we see what's going on all around the world as the economies are really on pause. And I think we'll see everything kick off and jumpstart here pretty quickly again once the lockdowns are lifted. It seems that everybody really wants to get back to the way that it was as quickly as possible, which is good news. It seems as if we may, at least here in the US, be dodging some of the worst predictions, which is also good, although it is quite bad still and will be for some while. So cost savings is something that everybody's talking about, particularly more so now than really ever before, at least in recent memory, so that we can get from point A here right now to point B where we're back at a normal place. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and how you might be able to save some money while still having a portfolio. So gentlemen, what I'd like to do is, before we go through the slides that we have created, I'd like to tap your brains and get you to give our listeners a preliminary sneak peek, if you will, as to what it is that we're going to talk about here today to kind of prime the well. So Jim, let's start with you. When we talk about this very important issue of cost savings while still maintaining a robust portfolio, what is it that you think people should be focusing on?
Well, Gene, of course, my view on this always goes to the product level itself. Each of these firms that are using the patent system are using it for a particular purpose. They're trying to protect the core functionality of a particular offering, whether it's a software or the physical utility of a particular product. They want that to be unique. Well, in times where there's plenty of money, we'll spend a number of different dollar amounts trying to ring fence and do other things to protect this central part of a value proposition, the really unique features. Now we need to get more specific. There just won't be enough money to go around. So we need a tighter lens, a better resolution on the things that are really critical, and we'll have to make the hard decisions depending on the resources that are available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's excuse me, that's just an unfortunate reality, at least for a while, I think. And you know, maybe that's going to wind up being a good thing, because I think there's been an awful lot of dead weight in a lot of portfolios. So now maybe there's just an opportunity for people to look at their portfolios in a more critical way and see what it is that they can actually do without, so to speak. William, what are your thoughts as we approach this topic initially?
I mean, I think it's really eye-opening how much it costs to maintain a patent portfolio. I mean, just to maintain a single patent in a few jurisdictions is surprisingly expensive and can quickly come close to the cost of, say, a full-time employee, something like this. So, and these costs are often overlooked or not questioned. Even, you know, within our own organization, this is just seen as something that we need to have, and the budgets for it are never really questioned. And so we need to really look at that and review it to make sure that we're making the right decisions, and we're not just falling into somewhere where we spend this money without knowingly doing it, without choosing to do it. I think it's important to, you know, making an active choice about spending this really large sum of money on these assets to make sure we're getting value from those.
Yeah, and that at the end of the day is or it, maybe I shouldn't say it is the name of the game. It should be the name of the game. And I think a lot of times there are other factors that go into it other than, does this make good business sense to continue to maintain this? And
Gene,
maybe it's just, go ahead.
Gene, I might add here that while we're going about being much more careful about what we choose to spend money on, in moments like this, there's always an opportunity to use the patent portfolio to build the brand in indirect ways. So for example,
yes. So yeah, elaborate.
So for example, right now, George Contreras from the University of Utah has started this COVID-19 open patent pledge, where for a limited period of time, very short period, firms are committing certain patents to this open license, right? And they get a lot of PR value from that. It's a limited license that they contribute, whatever technologies they have that they know will contribute to addressing the short-term urgency of finding a solution or solutions for the COVID-19 epidemic, right? They have the functionality. They know it's there. They're going to find out about it by being very parsimonious about what they choose to maintain. But then at this moment, once they know about it, they can also act in a brand building way to look socially responsible.
Right. And I think sometimes people lose sight of the fact that a patent is an asset. And with an asset, you can do many different things that are beneficial to the business. And it is not always excluding others. Sometimes there are other things, you know. And to cascade for a minute, back in the day when I used to do a lot more copyright stuff, and some of you may know that I was a co-owner of an independent record label very early on in my career. You know, we used to tell these artists that nobody knew, is like, yes, you can use your copyright and prevent everybody from doing everything if that's what you want to do, but then nobody's going to know who you are. You know, when nobody knows who you are, you want to use your intellectual property to promote yourself. So we shouldn't be trying to stop people from downloading your music for free. We ought to be trying to promote them to download your music for free. You know, so there are very creative ways that you can go about doing this, and you know, maybe we'll talk about that as well here. But I know the topic for today, specifically, William, is about how do you find those savings in the portfolio itself. So why don't we start with the slides that you have prepared, And let's see where the discussion takes us.
So, I mean, this is the point in our discussions normally where we're talking about the patent asset index, you know, what we're going to be talking about today. So it's nice to have a change of track, right? That we can just starting this with discussing something different. Don't worry, those slides will come later. But yeah, I mean, we've been working on this for a while, and it's something that we've used in a lot of consulting projects at PatentSight, and we figured this is something that, you know, can bring a lot of light to people and help them really manage their portfolios. So it's something that we wanted to add to our software offering. So including in there the annuity fees for all the patents that are covered by the software, so all the patents worldwide, how much they're going to cost in all of those jurisdictions, and casting that forward as well, so we can see the prediction of, okay, today our portfolio is going to cost us, I don't know, 2 million, say, but in 5 years that cost might increase further because of the nature of the way that patent payment structures are set up, that these things end up costing us more in the future, even if we don't have any more filings. So looking forward in that way, we can then also plan our budgets in the future. Yeah, and also make those decisions about, you know, are we really getting value for these? Do we maintain them, or should we be considering something else? And I think when we look at this top down, which we will do to start with, I think people will be really surprised about how much these organizations are potentially paying for maintaining these assets.
Yeah, it really costs an awful lot of money to do that. And you know, and that's why some of your top patenting companies in the world are not the ones that get the most patents are not always the ones that own the most patents, because they get those patents and then they decide through a pruning process which ones to keep, because it's very, very expensive to keep them.
Or even a sale process. I mean, you know, IBM is the top filer, but they do sell a lot of their assets, right? So
Yeah.
Obviously they sold off all of Global Foundries to the Saudi Arabian government, but if you look at the portfolios of LinkedIn, of Snap, of these emerging or have emerged, and the new ones as well, tech companies, they're buying up these assets from those big filers because they need the level of protection. So these change hands a lot as well.
Right. Yeah. Twitter bought the 900 or so patents, I think it was, from IBM before they went public. So the next slide here has an interesting curve. What does this tell us?
So this is then the whole database. So we're looking at across all of the companies, across all of the jurisdictions, what are the companies spending, and it's cumulative. So across the horizontal, where we're adding up companies, so 1, 2, 3, 150, and so on until we have all of them. And on the vertical, we have the total annuity fees that everyone is paying. And this is just for 2020. So in 2020, so this is just taking the top 10 offices as a starting point, but in those most expensive offices, or the ones with the largest costs associated with them because of the number of patents, there will be more than $5 billion spent at those offices just to maintain these portfolios, the worldwide patent portfolios. And so not including those prosecution fees, not including the fees for the attorneys and such, this will be the cost, which in itself, I think is a surprisingly large figure. But then when we move to the left-hand side of this, we can say, okay, I mean, what about 50% of this? So the 2.5 billion, how many companies in total are contributing to that 2.5 billion? And actually it's just 166 companies who account for half of all the annuity payment fees in 2020. So half of that 5.1 billion is accounted for by just these 166 companies, and then you have many with fewer assets accounting for the rest of that tail. And at the very end of that, so if we just take the 50 companies which have the largest budgets, they account for 1.3 billion in 2020 alone.
That's staggering. And I know that here in the next slide, maybe we get to this because we have a poll question here. So let's see, we publish the poll question here. Let me launch the poll. So the poll should be launching here so everybody can see this, hopefully. There we go.
There's the question.
Did the poll get launched?
No.
There we
it is.
go.
There's
Okay.
the answer.
Okay. So who is the biggest annuity fee budget? And it seems people think IBM in the lead there with people's thoughts, followed by Samsung. I mean, IBM would be a good bet, right? I mean, everyone knows that they are the #1 filer in the US for God knows how many years, right?
Yeah. So what do we have the answer? Oh, actually, the answer's on the next slide, right?
Exactly.
There we go.
So the answer to the poll is still up, but the answer is actually Samsung, which a lot of people thought, right? But yeah, about half of people, and they actually account for in 2020 more than 100 million in annuity fees across the world. They are spending more than double the next highest in 2020, which is massive. I mean, I know Samsung is a big company, but that seems outrageous protection that they're pouring in there.
Yeah. Can you all see the slide that has Samsung up there at the top?
Yeah. What's even more surprising about this is the position of IBM.
Yes.
Down there at number 18, right? Why? IBM does not pursue international protection for its patent portfolio. And so they forgo all the expensive transaction costs of overseas patent office annuity fees.
And they also, although they get the most patents in the US, they are not the largest US patent owner because of the reasons we were just talking about. They do prune. They prune through not paying maintenance fees, and they also prune by selling valuable assets to those who need them, and presumably, although those sales are confidential, would take a license back. That would be standard practice. So IBM is a fairly sophisticated user of the patent system in that way, in managing their portfolio budget long term.
Yeah, it's surprising that country focus that a lot of these companies have. I mean, looking into Samsung a bit deeper as well. I mean, they go for priority most of the time at the USPTO as well. So you can see that US focus to a lot of these organizations, even if they're elsewhere, which does add a big amount to the costs that they have to bear.
Yeah. So now on the next slide, this is where we get into those of you who have been on other PatentSight webinars have probably come to be familiar with this this type of chart here. William, can you explain what it is that we're looking at? I find this chart to be extremely useful as a quick way to convey an awful lot of meaning.
Yeah, so this is the kind of analysis we normally do in PatentSight. So this doesn't have that annuity fee data in, but we want to bring this in to further the discussion. So what we're normally looking in these webinars with the patent asset index is what is the value of the portfolios and what is the strength of the portfolios of these organizations. So we've got the same 25 companies that we saw in the table before, and we look at the portfolio size, so the number of patents that they have, and on the vertical here we have the competitive impact, and the competitive impact is a measure of the value or the quality of the individual patent rights. And what we have in the bubble size is effectively the product of these axes. So the summation of the competitive impact, the sum of the quality for all the patents in the portfolio, and this is the patent asset index. So companies with very different positions on this chart can have the same bubble size. So they can have the same patent asset index, but that can be made up of, say, if we look at Canon, who's in the bottom right there with 80,000 patents and a competitive impact of about 1. So 1 is the average for the database. So it's an average portfolio, but very large in comparison to Johnson & Johnson, which has a much smaller portfolio, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 patent families. But the competitive impact, the average quality of that portfolio is extremely high. And so these two bubble sizes, the patent asset index for these is very similar. So then when we're trying to level the playing field and say, okay, we want to take into account the big organizations with many patents, but we don't want to overvalue those. We don't want to have just massive organizations in China with hundreds of thousands of patents, but we also want to see those small players or smaller players. I mean, we're looking at quite the top of here, but if you want to look at valuable startups, we want to include those as well, but without including all the noise that potentially comes with looking at portfolios of, say, 10 patents or so. So we need a way of leveling the playing field to weight those appropriately to find out, okay, what's really interesting in this space. And the patent asset index is a fantastic tool for doing that we can then understand what the makeup is and what the strategy is of these companies as well. Are they really just looking for holding valuable patents, or are they having very large portfolios? And when we can use that not just for picking those things out, but understanding that strategy is really important. I mean, Gene, we had this, I think the most fantastic example of this is the one with the 5G topic that we did a while ago. And you can see the different strategies, the interdigital, which is almost all licensing revenue with a really high quality and a small portfolio. Qualcomm, which is also here with a high quality but a larger portfolio where they make a lot of their money from licensing, but from other sources as well. And then the Huawei, which is also here conveniently with a much larger portfolio but a lower quality, when they're actually not making so much money from licensing. They don't need to make sure every single patent that they have has a really high value, but they're also protecting the products, right? So they are producing products for end users, and they need to have the IP there to make sure that they can effectively sell those. And so there's a huge amount of information that we can get from this, but really this is what is the value of the assets, right? What is the benefit that we're getting from them? And the other side of that is the costs, which is also what we're talking about today.
So before I ask you, hold on, before I ask this question, Will, that we always get, which is how is the competitive impact measured? What I'll let people know is you can do this, and we've done this most recently, looking at specifically a certain slice of a portfolio. So you can, in using PatentSight, you can go through and do a search and narrow it down by terms and classes and that sort of thing. And those of you who joined us for the patent landscape on the antiviral patents will know that Johnson & Johnson was also the #1 company in that space as well in terms of quality, with Gilead very closely behind. So you can look at their entire portfolio doing this, and you can also look at a subset slice of the portfolio as well. So PatentSight is a great tool when what you're trying to do is look at different portions of a portfolio to get a sense of how large it is, and then how strong it is in terms of the competitive impact. Now, Will, do you want to try and, I know what I'll say is the answer to how this competitive impact is measured, we address this in an entire webinar and really only scratch the surface. There is a white paper it's an extremely long white paper, and we can send that out to everybody so you can get it. What I'll say is that the European Commission uses PatentSight when they're determining and looking at portfolios and deciding about antitrust issues and mergers and that sort of thing. So all of the information about how this is actually calculated is known, is completely transparent. And if you want to read it, you can get access to it. And we'll facilitate that for those of you, the nerds among us, who I know many of you, like me, will want to take a closer look and see how it is calculated. But Will, 20,000 feet, how do you determine competitive impact?
Yeah, so competitive impact is calculated through two subcomponents, and these are a metric called technology relevance and market coverage. And the technology relevance, this is citation based. So citations are, a measure of relevance for a document, or in this case, a technology, that are used not just in patents, but in scientific literature, and also so the system that Google use, PageRank, to determine the relevance of web pages to feed people results, is a similar system looking at the links between the pages to determine the relevance of an individual page. So it's pretty well established. We make some corrections in that for other factors. So the age of the patent, the technology, the patent office practices, because some patent offices cite much more. So we do some correction for this, and this gives us the relevance of their technology. But the other component of that is how well that is protected as well, and that's the market coverage. So here we look at what is the market size, so the GNI for all the countries where that patent is protected and active, and we benchmark that against the US, and we multiply these two together, because we need to have a relevant technology and reasonable protection in order for us to benefit from it. I mean, if we have the game-changing patent, if we have the COVID-19 vaccine, but we have no active protection, that's kind of like a negative for our business. There's a loss there, because we're not just not maintaining protection, but we're also telling everyone about how we do that. And so we need both of these components to really be able to determine that a patent is bringing some level of value for its holder.
Yeah, I mean, it is an awful lot that goes into it, and there are formulas and assumptions and a very detailed description, and can be read. And if you are interested, we can get that information to you. So Jim, I think I had interrupted you as we were going down that path, and the reason why I wanted to stop and take that question is because I know that's one that we always get when we're doing this, is people always want to know, well, how did you determine that? But Jim, go ahead. Did you have thoughts?
Yeah, just on the calculus of average competitive impact, which was the question you were just referring to, Gene. It's not a white paper. This is actually something out of the academic literature, which means a whole lot of people looked at this very carefully, and they criticized the hell out of it. And the authors demonstrated with valid evidence that this thing works, and there's real correlation here. And few of the other techniques that are out there have gone through the rigor of academic publication, where they open themselves up to criticism. They show the whole procedure and the methods and the assumptions and the equations that you're referring to, Gene. But that's the basis of PatentSight. It's a differentiator in this asset index, competitive impact, and technology relevance and market coverage that Will was talking about, measured at the patent family level, are unique. And then the other thing that I would mention quickly is in that previous slide where you had all of the average competitive impacts and a whole bunch of different firms, you can see in this how patents play different roles in different industries. J&J here is from healthcare, and all the healthcare companies they'll be in the small lower end portion less than 10,000 patents in their portfolios because they don't need numbers. Their patents are really well prosecuted. And in that context, they're very tight. They control the value system.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the rest of these are more complex. So they need a lot more patents to independently fence in a unique element of their offerings. So this kind of slides really show the differences between patents portfolios in different industries.
They really do. And the one thing and I shouldn't say always, but maybe I can't say always, strikes me as interesting is whenever we do one of these, Will, no matter what slice we seem to be looking at, Johnson & Johnson is always at the top. And I guess, Johnson & Johnson is not your typical pharma company. They do pharma.
They do surgical robots. They have a really advanced surgical robots as well, where they do get a sizable chunk of that quality from as well. And
right, they cut across a number of different sections, and so that's a company that that sees an awful lot of different innovation from an awful lot of different spaces. I don't know.
And it's pretty successful in those areas as well, right? I mean, there are other companies in here who are very broad, but maybe not quite as successful in all of those spaces. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know other than an observation what that means at this point, but maybe that's a conversation for a different day. But what I will say is, whenever we look at different portfolios, whatever landscape we seem to be looking at, in the high tech spaces that we've been looking at, Johnson & Johnson scores very well. So all right, so let's move to, I think this is the next slide that we have up here, which is another patent asset index slide. And this gets us into the annuity fee discussion based on, I guess, how much they're paying in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I alluded to when I was describing the other thing. So a patent asset index, this is a measure of the value of the portfolio. What is the strength of those assets? And annuity fees, this is the cost. This is what we're paying to maintain them. Of course, there are other costs associated with that, and there are other factors, but this is then a basic cost benefit analysis. And maybe it's difficult for everyone to see. There is a diagonal dotted line that I've placed on there, cutting through just to understand that things that are in the top left triangle, basically, they are paying more and getting less, and those that are in the bottom right here are kind of getting more and paying less. So to get more value out of everything, that we want to be kind of bottom right in this analysis. And Samsung kind of messed that up because of their massive portfolio. So if we click to the next slide, we can just cut them out and just focus on everyone else, so we can see that a little bit clearer. And so here we can see, okay, how much are we spending? What's our cost, and what's our benefit? What's the patent asset index out of this? So we can start to benchmark the kind of relative effectiveness of the maintenance of these portfolios. So you have some there which, like Fujitsu or IBM, where they're paying more. So if we take Fujitsu, say, they're paying the same amount as Alphabet, but have about half, a third of the patent asset index for that price, basically.
Mm-hmm. And then on the next slide, you focus on Toyota.
So the rest of the analysis here, we thought it would be good to focus on a particular company. So drill in somewhere and say, this is the high level view. This is the top down. Okay, how much is everyone spending in these areas? But we figured it would probably be good to focus on a particular area to kind of get some more relevant assessment. I mean, here these companies are very diverse. We've already mentioned that, the Johnson & Johnson, there's Qualcomm in there, there's all kinds of things. So benchmarking these different companies against each other is in some parts doable, but not as meaningful maybe as looking at companies within a particular technology space. So we figured, okay, Toyota's here, we can take automotive. That's an interesting industry basically, and drill in a little bit. So this is just to focus our eye. Toyota's there is in the middle somewhere of our set. They're slightly on the getting slightly more and paying slightly less relatively area, and so we figured we'd drill in a little bit more to that. So on the next slide,
a poll question. So let's publish this.
So their fees were 30 million. So that's what we just saw on the slide. So in 2020, Toyota's spending $30 million US on maintaining their portfolio. And so the question is then, do we expect them to pay next year or in 2025 less, 20 million, the same, 30 million, more, like 50 million, or maybe more than double, 75 million in 2025?
Okay, we've got about 35% of the people voted, so let's just give them a little bit more time. Got quite a bit of votes still rolling in here.
I mean, personally, I think it's an interesting question that, without taking into account new filings, just this is our portfolio. Is it going to maintain? Should we expect the costs that we are having to pay this year? Should they roll forward? Should we just continue budgeting the same amount every year, or do we need, in order to those new filings to and we can spend more, or do we need to budget more every year, or do we need to prune something every year in order to maintain the same budget?
Yeah, so I'm trying to share the results and they should be up there right now. So
okay, a lot of people are saying 50 million, so people know that they need to budget more, right?
Yeah, so what's the answer?
So the answer, which is on the next slide, is actually 75 million. So if we can see here, this is Toyota Motor, and this is the progression of their annuity fees. And so we see the portfolio size, the gray bar. This is the number of patents, on the number of patent families on which Toyota will need to pay annuity fees on each year. And so this increases because of the payment systems mean that they may be not paying so much to start with, or not every year, and it diminishes over time because those patents become inactive at some point, their natural life. And then the red bars are actually what they're paying each year, and this year they're paying that about 30 million. But if we go forward to 2025, it's going to be 75, and actually it seems like in 2029 it will be 80 and peak at 80. So nearly triple what they're going to spend this year they will have to budget for in the future if they do no filings and do no active maintenance of their portfolio, if they don't prune anything.
So that's what I was going to ask you. So this counts for no additional filings.
Right. If they just stop innovating today and just say, that's our portfolio, that's enough for us, we're just going to continue with those patents, this is how those patents play out over time.
Wow.
Well, there's a detail here that is worth explaining. Some patent offices actually aggressively raise how much you have to pay for each annuity fee, and that includes the US.
So something we found out really interestingly recently when we were going through some of this is that Denmark was really interesting, and I know that's not something that gets said every day, but we were comparing it to Germany, and the fee payment for them starts really high, but doesn't progress very much. And so Germany starts lower, but then overtakes Denmark and becomes much more expensive. And particularly Denmark being a country where you might not go to for the whole life of the patent. Maybe that's a smaller country which you might prune off. Actually, asking the question, should we file there in the first place, is maybe the right question, because they're charging so much in those early years, and maybe because people more often prune and don't maintain patents for a long time, they've had to change their payment structure to be more flat rather than progressive, the way many countries do, to take into account of that. So there's, I think, a lot of interest for even the patent offices in this. I mean, we obviously have a collaboration which we very public about with the Swiss Patent Office as well, and understanding how this is going to change their budgets as well, or how they should structure their fee payments can be interesting or helpful information.
Yeah. So on the next slide here, this looks like this is just a look at what Toyota's current portfolio.
Yeah, so we just wanted to drill down to a technology area. So this is just our technology clusters. So we just wanted to pick an area where we could drill into. And obviously Toyota is an automotive company, so we take that automotive set. So you can see that excludes things like the actual engines or the electric powertrain and such. Really, we're talking about the other components of automotive, and that's what we're going to drill into, and that's the area that we're going to further look at in the slides, basically.
Okay, and then so this gives us an idea of who the other players are.
Right, and here we can start to say, okay, is Toyota a atypical or typical company within their peer group? So they are obviously going to be one of the top companies in there in terms of portfolio size. At least we've already established that they're paying a lot of maintenance fees. That's why they came into our analysis to start with. So they're very likely going to be at the top, and that's what we see. We also saw from that earlier cost benefit analysis with the patent asset index and the annuity fees that they were also getting quite good value for money. They were in the bottom right hand section of this analysis, so we saw that they were getting good value. So it's no surprise then that they have a very high patent asset index. That's the yellow bar here, and the annuity fees are the blue. So it's no great surprise they're at the top there. But then the question is, are they getting the best value for money out of that? I mean, if we look down to the next player in there, the VW group, they're paying a very similar amount, but are actually have about half the patent asset index in there. So they're paying a similar amount for their protection, but the value they're maybe getting out of that seems to be significantly less. Yeah. And conversely, if we cast our eyes a little bit further down, there is Ford.
Yeah, that one caught my eye.
Exactly, about half the payments, but nearly the same patent asset index as Toyota and Ford. I mean, we have touched on it in other webinars, and we had an automotive one recently where I think we touched on it as well. But Ford has kind of an innovation resurgence in the last 5 years or so, with much more filings, stronger assets. I mean, I don't know everything of what they're doing, but they seem to be going in the right direction, and then that's evident here as well when we're looking at the value that they're getting versus the cost that they're putting in.
Yeah, that one jumps off the page at me as well. So that's going to bear some further investigation, I think, to see what it is, because there's a story to be told there, right? I mean, because I think most people probably would not think of Ford as being highly innovative. I mean, I full disclosure, I've driven Ford vehicles for a very long time. I am a big believer. Those of you who know me, I love the Ford F-150. I drive those. Renee tells me I have an F problem, because when I get behind, every time I go looking for a new vehicle, I wind up buying another Ford F-150. And so I love Fords, and I love everything about them. And my friends always give me a tough time and say, yeah, Ford, they're not keeping up with the times, they're not really particularly innovative. This tells a different story here, this slide.
Yeah, but I think that is a recent thing, right? I think if we look at the trend over time, which isn't here, but we have looked at in the past, you can see that for a long time, they were obviously just riding on, what the general R&D that was occurring in the automotive field, and not being maybe the most innovative company, but obviously producing really popular vehicles. I mean, that Ford F-150 outsells like every other truck in the world. I mean, there's some ridiculous statistics associated with the sales of that truck, I think.
Right, I think that's the most sold vehicle in the world, because it is used at, construction sites, and governments use it as,
and only in the US as well, only sold in the US, but the most sold It's craziness.
Yeah, I know it is. It is, and it's interesting. And I would say, and I don't want to derail the remaining slides that we have here. It'd be interesting to see how much of that is tied to the aluminum body, because that was a particularly interesting innovation that Ford came up with.
Controversial at the time.
And very controversial, and it has worked and worked very well. And it's been safer because what they wound up doing was they wound up putting extra steel into the frame and still reducing the weight. And insurance companies have found that it's become cheaper to repair the vehicles as well. So it's been a win-win-win all the way around. And it was very controversial. I'm gonna need to look into that more just because I'm interested in that. But let's move on to the next slide here.
And so
what are we looking at here?
We need to then ask the question, where are they spending that? So if we look at Ford, say, who seems to be getting a lot of value out of their portfolio without a huge spend, they are almost entirely protecting in the US. It's no great surprise there, with some protection in Germany and China and some small amount in the UK further along the analysis there. And maybe that's sufficient, right? Maybe that's enough for them. I mean, we know from some of these guys that we talk to that protecting in the auto industry one major economy is sufficient, because if you can't sell that item in one major economy, you basically can't sell it, which I think is very different from, say, the chemical industry, where there is some guy down the road who is going to probably produce chemicals that are just homogeneous, that can be reproduced fairly effectively at the lowest price possible. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that protection is sufficient for that.
That's what I understand.
It's very different.
Yeah, because I have a friend who, and I won't say which company it is, but who's chief IP counsel at let's say a major auto company, and they do not file PCTs, and because when you're going PCT, raises the expense. And if you know where you want to get protection, it's always cheaper to go directly to the countries where you want protection and need protection. And they go, much like Ford, to like a small handful of countries, 4 or 5 different countries, to seek the protection that they want, because those are the markets that matter to them. So the auto industry is in some ways very sophisticated at keeping their patent costs down, both their filing costs and their carrying costs with their maintenance, because they're not, I mean, Toyota sort of is an exception. VW here, a little bit surprising that they're going all over the place to some extent. I mean, Germany obviously very high, but
this is such a powerful slide. You cannot get this information out of sophisticated analysis of any of their public disclosures.
No.
Right. This is the only place you can get this kind of insight. And I actually, this first time I've seen this slide, Will, and I'm getting all sorts of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, but this,
the auto industry really.
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
I mean, it really jumps out for them because of those as Gene, you were saying, the kind of sophisticated strategies that they have, basically. But they're really focused on their home countries a lot of the time. I mean, the home countries for these, pretty much for every single company, jumps off the page, right? And then we can say, okay, where are their markets? And those are then the next bubbles down, right? So you immediately know where's important for these companies and where they're getting into. And if those change, then you can tell a lot from that as well.
That's right.
I mean, and understanding that filing strategy, understanding what is the strategy that we have, what is the strategy our competitors have in terms of countries, is not always an easy thing, right? We talk to companies very often who just don't know. They know that they need to protect their assets, and they think, okay, my home country, that's a good start, but where else? I mean, we sell things here. Our competitor has a factory there. We're not very in China, so maybe we won't bother, or will we want to go there in the future? And maybe we should protect there a little bit. Making those decisions are really challenging for people, and without some guidance, it must be a massive struggle. I don't know how you do it. It must be throwing darts in the dark sometimes.
Yeah. So James, we have a question here from Brian that asks, what are some of those ideas that you're getting when you're looking at this chart? Would you care to share? I know that they're probably not super well developed since they're just popping into your head, but would you care to brainstorm a little with us?
No, I don't mind at all. Okay, so let's just look at one line of these companies and where they're spending their annuity fees. Okay, that is a explicit expression of interest in maintaining the uniqueness of that particular patented functionality in those specific markets. So the idea that I'm getting is I can see down at the patent family level exactly where they think this particular technology is going to be important. Okay, so they think, you can see there's a small bubble in Ireland that's going to be related to the size of the economy. A larger, maybe 3 times the size bubble in Sweden. I'm beginning to see things that I can now try and track to the size of the automotive market for each company. And then I can track back to the technology that they're making a bet on by paying the maintenance fees as saying it's important in that particular jurisdiction. That's what I'm brainstorming. I mean, yeah,
that's a massive insight into what these people think the value of their assets are, right?
That's it. And I can get down to a very discrete level.
Yeah, and on some level too, you know, like if you look at Ford's line, for example, and knowing what we know about how much of what Ford does is dictated by the F-150 and the other larger vehicles that are built on the F-150 frame, you know, there's not a lot of activity in Europe, really. You know, the UK maybe, but
yeah, I mean, they had activity in the UK. I think they stopped a lot of that. I know in Wales they had a plant and they're closing that down now with some troubles. But maybe we'll see that change. Maybe we'll see that bubble will decrease.
but in America, it's where the roads are wide open, the country's wide open. And people have a love affair with cars. There are a lot of larger vehicles, you know, and a lot of the rest of the world, you don't see the large vehicles. You don't see the same love affair with cars that we have here in the US. So Ford, who has to some extent, maybe, in my opinion, kind of cornered the market on that larger vehicle. It's not surprising that you don't see bigger bubbles, you know, like in Ireland, for example, you know, or in other parts of Europe, you know, where the market, they're just not interested in that kind of vehicle, you know, and certainly Ford in South Korea.
I mean, that's surprising for me as well. South Korea in this. I mean, how are people not capitalizing on them as a country? I mean, people realize they need to protect in Japan at least a little bit, but how are none of them, except for the home players, active there really?
Is that just because maybe they're ceding to the home players and realizing? I mean, maybe there's a bit of nationalism. I mean, this chart
maybe opens
up so many questions, really.
Yeah. In fact, there's 2 entire continents with a lot of people on them that are not even on this chart.
Right.
And that speaks volumes, because those trucks are being used. But the intellectual property system in and of itself is just not very important in those jurisdictions. And this explains it through the way that these companies are spending their money.
Yeah. But everybody's in China, everybody's in the US, and everybody's in Germany. You know, and that's why when you go to conference after conference after conference, and I've heard people say, I'm sick and tired of hearing about litigation in Germany, litigation in the US, litigation in China. Well, this is why you hear about it, because that's where these companies are getting their assets. You know, you're not going to hear about litigation in Italy. You're not going to hear about litigation in Ireland. You know, you're not going to hear about litigation in Spain because nobody gets assets in those places, really. Not nobody, but, you know, comparatively, you know. So we're running a little bit low here on time, and we had a question a while back that I thought was a really good one, and it was when we were talking about, let's see if I can get to the slide. It was when we were talking about this slide here. The question was, how do you move into that lower triangle, you know, to get down below so that you're getting more and paying less? And now I have a thought. I have some thoughts, you know, and it kind of came up when we were talking about that last slide when we were kind of riffing about what this last slide is showing us, and talking about where it matters for your protection. You protect in your home country, and then in your next biggest marketplace. You got to have an idea of where it is that you're going to need protection, and go there. And I think that there's nothing wrong with filing a PCT application for a lot of companies, but rushing off to file a PCT application in general, I think, is a mistake. I think PCT applications are intended for pharmaceutical companies who are going to want protection everywhere, biotech companies are going to need protection everywhere. And if you're working in standards, you know, think Ericsson, Qualcomm, those kinds of companies, where their standard is going to be everywhere. Think 5G kind of stuff. But somebody somewhere in your organization, if you want to save money, has got to be thinking about where's our market. And if you're not thinking about that, then you're going to wind up spending a whole lot of extra money. Like, I mean, because if we go back to this slide here, VW Group is not getting an awful lot of money, or they're paying a lot for their maintenance, and their asset index is lower than Ford. It's lower than Toyota. It's about equal to Honda for Honda's paying half the cost. And you go over here, and that's not shocking. I mean, they're trying to protect everywhere, right? I mean, I would think that maybe trying to protect in fewer of those places, if I were at VW, would be what I would be trying to do. And if not protecting fewer of those places, I would be protecting less in those places and trying to really ratchet up the quality of the patent, because sometimes the patent asset index here can be affected not based on the underlying innovation. It can be affected based on the patent that was written just wasn't written very well. You know, it doesn't really articulate the invention very well. You didn't pay very much to get it. You didn't pay very much to prosecute it. So you didn't get very much for it. I mean, because one of the things, Will, that goes into the patent asset index, isn't it citations, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So if citations matter, which we all know that citations matter. I mean, they matter for a whole lot of reasons. If citations matter and you paid an attorney half of what they should have been paid to write the patent and half of what they should have been paid to prosecute the patent, and nobody's citing your patent that you got, is that shocking? No, not at all, because the underlying innovation may be wonderful, but what you wrote was crap. You didn't write an A paper, you wrote a C paper. Nobody cites the C paper, everybody cites the A paper. You know, it can be that simple. So this gets us back to the quality versus quantity. And we live in a world where quality matters. Now, you need a certain level of quantity to be sure, but for God's sake, I preach this all the time. You got to give your patent attorneys enough money to actually help you. Jim, thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I would actually go back to the bubble slide, the one that we were just looking at. You're right.
Oh,
you need to give the attorneys the resources, but it's the question of what are the technologies and where is the margin? Okay, so you want them to spend the money protecting those features that really earn you a margin. And the beauty of that annuity fee slide per country that we had a few moments ago is that you can see where they're spending the money, which reflexively suggests exactly where they're making their margin. In all circumstances, that is what you are really protecting. You can explain lots of things about patents to everyone in your company, but everyone understands margin, especially in the CFO suite, where they easily get lost in the fog of patent language idiosyncrasy. But when you say, look, this is our margin, we need to work really hard to make sure that every penny we're spending protects and maybe even grows the margin, then it all makes sense. And that's why I was getting so excited about this particular slide that we put up now. Now I can correlate margin with the jurisdiction.
Right.
And we can do the other thing as well, which is correlate this margin with quality as well, and break that up a little bit. I think if we go to the last two slides that we have here, then we have this and James, I think you know this well, this decile chart that we have, where we have the patents within Toyota's portfolio that are in the bottom 10% globally, and the patents that are in the top 10% globally on the right there. And these ones on the left-hand side of the diagram here, the left of this dotted line, these are below average patents. So the average is there quite high on the right-hand side. And actually, about a quarter of all of Toyota's annuity fees are associated with, in 2020, these lower quality patents. And so there's huge opportunity in there for pruning. And yeah, we can put some numbers on that. So that's this bottom 70% will cost them more than $8 million in 2020, and over their lifetime will cost that's a third of $1 billion if they continue to pay for those. And these are patents that appear to not be bringing them some value. Of course, there can be reason to maintain those, even if there can be reasons to strategically maintain patents that aren't of any technical value. But if we say, I don't know, an eighth of them are actually prunable, that's still $1 million this year to be saved.
See, now that's powerful, because then what it does is it allows people to do pruning with some kind of intelligence, because a lot of times the pruning is done just by moving chits around, and it's not done by somebody who has really done any kind of meaningful analysis about what should be kept and what should not be kept. But I mean, this is really powerful. I mean, because it gives, and it maybe, as you said, doesn't give everybody the specific answer. Should these be kept strategically or should they not be kept strategically? And there may be countervailing reasons why you would want to keep them or not. But like with every other AI or facilitated assistance, it gives you a starting point that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So now you know where to look. Now you know where to save money.
Where do you start? I mean, are you going to read through all of these? And that's a huge task, right? I remember James, I think you did this publication with Carsten about looking into the Dyson portfolio, was it? I think, and we did some categorization, going through and categorizing all of these patents, what product they're associated to. It's a huge task, and that's not even a big portfolio. How does someone like Toyota do that? It must be
Dyson's only 300 patents.
Right.
Yeah. But more importantly, all this detail that we see in this slide now becomes one more attribute in the database to characterize and then use artificial intelligence to rationalize what we want in our portfolio.
Right.
And be sure of the decisions that you make, right? Because if you're pruning that patent, you want to be at least pretty sure that this isn't going to be the game changer down the road, because things can change, and you don't want to be pruning your quality innovations. And
we have a question about that. How do you do that? Is there a way that you can do that, or is there any way that you can have some kind of confidence that you're not about to prune something that may be down the road a game changer?
I mean, the patent asset index, you already mentioned that it's based on citations, and so this gives us a good indication. We do a lot of corrections for that to give an understanding of how many citations received is the right amount for that patent of that age, of that technology, and such, to make sure that we're not just comparing numbers with each other that can be very difficult. But I mean, if you've got a patent that's 10 years old and never has received any citations, no one's building on that. And a lot of companies have those in their portfolio. There's seriously low-hanging fruit, and that's the easy stuff to point out. We can take the next step and use indicators to help that. But James?
There's also a lot of historical reasons why people hang on to patents.
Right.
and there needs to be a record of that, because people flow in and out of the firm, inventors come and go. So if you have a good disciplined database, you can make records, you can mark attributes in the database about why you're hanging on to this patent, and that why can be revisited on a regular basis. And if the why is no longer relevant, gone or sold or licensed.
But like you say, people move in and out of those roles, and I mean, I've talked with organizations who have fantastically organized internal documentation, and I've worked with organizations who have fantastically disorganized internal information as well. And if you're the head of IP walking into that situation of the disorganized situation, how do you then turn it around?
Yeah.
It's not so easy.
Well, it is not so easy sometimes. And I think the way you turn it around, if you're the head that comes walking in, based on conversations I've had with some of my friends who have gone into that role, one of the things that you have to do is you have to be able to talk to the CFO, for example, in terms that the CFO understands. And it's risk is the way that they understand. What was the term that you just used, Jim, that you said that CFOs, it was
margin.
Margin.
They know margin.
They know margin. So you got to talk in the financing terms that they understand. You know, they understand risk versus liabilities. They understand margins. They understand these kind of financial concepts. If you can go in and start talking to them in a language that they understand and lose the patent ease, then you've got at least a shot, because you're not talking Spanish and they're talking French. You're both talking the same language, which helps. The other thing that I would say here about looking at this chart, if you want to have some confidence that what you're about to prune may be the stuff that you really can get away with, is use multiple different iterations here. You know that this is the bottom 70% based on your competitive impact. Now go and do some other searches to see, well, what type of stuff are you no longer working on? Are you no longer interested in? Where's the company going? That you used to do X and you're not really interested in X anymore. Well, do the search and find out where your patents are in that space. And if you have a bunch of patents in that space that are also in the bottom 70%, well, then get rid of them. Try and
signs point to no.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's like investing in the stock market. You know, you don't invest in a company simply because one sign is pointing up. You look and say, are there multiple indicators that suggest that this is a company I ought to invest in? So are there multiple indicators that suggest this is a patent that is safe to get rid of? And if you know what to look for, you can find that with some confidence. And obviously you might want to try and sell these. And the other nice thing about PatentSight too is you can identify companies that are in that space that have portfolios that might be able to benefit from that which you need to get rid of. So maybe you can turn a liability into at least some kind of money.
Right.
So, but we are almost 10 minutes past. And, we could go on and on and on. Our audience has not dropped off very much as we left the lunch hour here on the East Coast. And I really appreciate you all from sticking around. What I'd like to do though is ask if you could stick for an extra minute or two, because I'd like to give you both an opportunity to wrap up in lightning round fashion if we can. I'll ask you both the same question. Jim, I'll start with you, and William, I'll go to you next. What is the one thing, Jim, that you would like people to leave the webinar today remembering?
Costs of patents are always important in any commercial environment. They are viewed as a cost center. So we have to have better and better lenses through which to understand that cost. And what I see with this analytics is we're really sharpening the knife. And that's nice.
Yeah. William, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we need to be making decisions based on knowing what we're doing. So we need to walk into these situations with something to back us up, not just fall into the spending money because we have or because we don't know better. And we need to take this information and from as many places as possible to be then sure of those decisions that we make, to be confident, because otherwise we are frozen in inaction.
Yeah, and that's a good place to end, I think, is you got to make your decisions from a place of information and knowledge. And this is one way that you can get that information and knowledge. And if you would like to reach out to PatentSight and talk to them about getting a demo, please feel free to do that. They have been a great sponsor for this webinar series, and without sponsors, it makes it impossible to bring this type of program to you. So thank you, PatentSight, and thank you all for joining us. And Jim, William, thank you for being with me today.
Great, thank you, Gene.
Thank you.
Always a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Jane.
Thank you guys, and you all have a good rest of your day.
You too.